Oh, okay. We are live. I'm just gonna you can do Instagram live from StreamYard. Come out. That's why you don't see me at this moment because we're going to go live on that as well.
Okay.
Oh man. Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
Here it is. Okay, we are live. Once you're live, you'll find on top of your Instagram feed. I don't think I'm live though. We get so much more people like on Instagram, but sometimes it's a little tricky. I think I can figure it out real quick though.
Okay.
Hmm. No. Okay. Yeah, it's not connecting. Give me I'm not moving. Give me I mean I am moving, but what I'll do for tonight, fam, who's watching, I'll just set up my camera to look at us. Okay, everybody, sorry, we're here. My guest is here.
Peace,
Just
everybody. Those who are here.
yeah, we're trying something new. As always. All right. Let me see come out. Oh my god, this is like so old school. All right. Hey, everybody watching, although now more people are gonna watch. Fam, the streaming software didn't work, so do what y'all do. Um, Go to my YouTube page though if you want to ask a question. But thank you to everybody. All right, everybody. Hi, I'm Rosa Clemente. Thank you so much for the official start of our show, Disrupt the Chaos, which is sponsored by Cooperation Jackson. And I'm so happy to have a disruptor, maybe more disruptive than me. I think you might win that one.
Depends on the year. Depends on
Depends
the year.
on the year and the day.
Yes. It's all
But
about
anyway, my dear comrade, close friend, Kamau Frnklin.
peace,
Well,
peace,
he's
peace.
not from Atlanta. He's from Brooklyn, but he lives in Atlanta.
Now in
Kamau,
Atlanta, originally from Brooklyn. Yes.
right? Kamau Frnklin is the founder of Community Movement Builders, has been a dedicated community organizer for over 30 years, beginning in New York City and now based in Atlanta. For 18 of those years, Kamau is a leading member of the National Grassroots Organization dedicated to the ideas of self determination and the teachings of Malcolm X. He has spearheaded organizing work in various areas, including youth organizing, development, public misconduct, and the development of sustainable urban communities. Kamau has coordinated and led community cop watch programs, liberation freedom schools for youth, electoral and policy campaigns, large scale community gardens, organizing collectives, and alternatives to incarceration programs. Kamau was an attorney for 10 years in New York with his own practice in criminal, civil rights, and transactional law. He now lives in Atlanta, Georgia, with his wife and two children. What up, Kamau?
What
Thank
up?
you
What
for
up? What
being
up?
here. While I go through all these technical difficulties because they don't want us to talk.
True. It's a pleasure as always to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So first and foremost, everybody in Florida and Tampa, like
Mm.
this is gonna be nothing people have seen. They said there hasn't been a storm like that in 100 years, but obviously we have no footage of 100 years ago. Um, and then as well already dealing with the previous Helene and now this, but they're calling this a monster storm. And so because I went to cover after the levee breach in New Orleans and Katrina, that was the first time where I was like, like water is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, growing up, like as a Puerto Rican and always in an ocean or stuff, like my parents were always like, respect the water, don't think anything, kind of anything could happen like that. And I don't think the folks in Asheville, North Carolina, even because I don't think the media said a lot about that. It was just like, what?
Mm-hmm.
And, these are mountainous areas. It's, one of the most beautiful parts of this country. And just seeing footage and houses flooding, it just like always brings me back to Katrina. But what this storm is going to do, I don't, on top of it, it's also hitting, in areas right now that are just covered in debris, and that those things is what kills you, right? Like rushing
Mm-hmm.
water, a tree branch, electrical, you're trapped in your car, and all this kind of stuff. So, I really hope folks can be as safe as possible. I really dislike the media saying that people that don't leave aren't smart, as opposed to saying why is in their system for people who don't have the means um to go. Why does that happen? Like, already
Mm-hmm.
have those systems in place, okay?
Yeah.
And of course there's always going to be people that are like, yo, I'm not leaving, and that's a choice that they and their family are making. But
And two quick things, FEMA, which is going supposedly is doesn't have enough money for this hurricane, while we're spending billions and billions of dollars on a genocide. But yet the FEMA, which is supposed to be rescuing people and taking care of people, is claiming, at least publicly, that it doesn't have enough resources. And two, we have to count some of these storms as human-made storms, in
yeah,
a sense of the power and the strength that these storms have because of the dissipation of the marshland, the changes in the environment, which is all human made. That these storms are not strictly natural occurrences, but there are occurrences because of a capitalist economy and climate degradation that is taking place, again, which also could be prevented. So it's not only putting in systems that can help people when these storms come, but the understanding that these storms are coming at the power in which they are coming is because of human contributed climate disaster, which we are now suffering from.
yeah. And right now, well, not right now, but what, like 10 days ago, because I wanted to start here with you. 10 days ago there was an explosion of a chemical plant in Atlanta, and we heard it briefly. And
Mhm.
I saw the when they were like, nobody go outside, close your windows, if you have a gas mask, put it on. I was like, what the hell? But we know that as well. It's definitely, that's some human error that happened. Either the
Mhm.
company wasn't keeping tabs or secure, whatever these chemical plants are supposed to be. But when that happened, like, what happened? I mean, like, people just had to stay inside for a couple of days, or
Well, at
what?
first they were sort of really hesitant to call it the type of disaster, air quality disaster that it was. And then only after people start, as always, people were recording and putting the fumes and the smoke and the fire online for folks to see, did the authorities then come and say that this was something that people should protect themselves from in terms of staying inside and so forth. And then in addition, this is actually the third time at this particular plant a fire has taken place, and so that a chemical explosion has taken place. The police authority, I think, was saying that in her 7 or 8 years as being on the job there, that this is not the first or the second, but again, the third time that this type of explosion has happened. And so, again, a human made disaster made worse by the lack of regulation or the lack of making sure that a company like this is following some sort of proper protocol to make sure that these type of explosions don't happen. But yes, there was basically an emergency alert that told everybody to stay inside and not to come outside for a little while. But as we all know, air, it's not like this thing stays, stops in one area. It's in the atmosphere, so it travels all over. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I this is what everybody's been saying. Like, it's not an existential crisis anymore. It's here, and we don't know what's going to happen, except we know a lot of not great things are going to happen. And it's not possible to like rein it all in at this time. It's not just like our country, the world. I mean, I was just reading about the Amazon River and how there are parts now that are completely dry, and part of this, I think people may not understand, particularly in this country, is that when we see those disasters everywhere else in communities or countries that don't have the means that we do have, it becomes a fight for water.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes the fight for drinkable water, and
Mm-hmm.
we're already here. We've seen Flint, Newark, all these places, but I think it's important that when it happens in Puerto Rico or it happens in Nigeria or all of these things, that the fight ends up being a fight for water. So Kamau, please let folks know about community movement builders. Why did you decide to create an organization like this, and what has been like, what has the community movement builders have been doing?
Hey, I'm on live. Okay, go. Bye. So, Community Movement Builders
Love it. Don't
is a
listen
grassroots
to that.
organization that I created in 2015 because I wanted to continue my work on as a community organizer. As stated in my bio, I was with Malcolm X grassroots movement for like 17, 18 years. And when I left and I moved back to Atlanta, I wanted to continue doing organizing work. And so at CMB, in some ways, it's an extension of the work I was already doing in Malcolm X grassroots movement. The purpose of the organization is to do grassroots organizing. Um, is to do grassroots organizing, and that means everything from on the ground. We're doing organizing against Cop City, organizing against over policing, organizing against gentrification. We do sustainability programs where we give people resources to stay in their homes to try to stop gentrification from taking place. We own several properties in the neighborhood where we move in organizers to do what we call workforce housing. So in exchange for cheap rent, these organizers will do work for CMB or with CMB in the neighborhood. And we now have grown to 8 chapters around the country in several different cities. And so we definitely are part of the build and fight strategy. The fight challenging the state, and the build is developing cooperatives, land trusts. So things that we as a community can hold on to. And so we think those things are extremely important. We must show people what the alternatives look like in terms of battling capitalism, but we must also be on the ground challenging the state in terms of it's unleashing its power, and usually in a negative way on our communities.
What are some of the cities that you have chapters? All 8?
I'm usually good at getting 7 out of 8, but we'll try Atlanta, Detroit, Dallas, Ypsi, which is in Michigan, LA, Sacramento, Delaware, and Kansas City. So
I
I
think
got
you
them
got
all.
all of them. Yeah, yeah.
I did,
And
surprisingly.
that's good, because people who live in these areas and might want to join, you all can go to Community Movement Builders, the website, see the staff, the programs that they have done. Um, I mean, I knew you were doing this. I just didn't know how that you had 8 other sites, in this way. Like, that's really difficult to do. Like, it's
Yeah,
difficult
it's
to run it.
not.
And
So it's not easy. Organizers are always, or people who politicize, our tendency to turn on each other, our tendency to have strife and discord, our tendency to have breakups. Even though we're fighting capitalism, it feels like a lot of times we're also fighting ourselves. So it is not always easy, but what you try to do is to get folks who are relatively speaking on the same page, who want to be dedicated to organizing again for Black self-determination against capitalism, against the type of development that's happening in our community. And you try to work with that, and you try to build, and you try to make something become, again, I think one of the things I think is missing in our time is that model of what self-determination looks like, and that model that's like left of the Democratic Party that talks about organizing, grassroots work, militant action, get again a socialist platform, but yet a broad-based, mass-based organization. And so we're
Right.
trying to do that. We're trying to build that. Again, the 8 chapters are here. We're trying to extend to more chapters, and we definitely want folks to join the organization and participate and have grace, not only with the organization but with each other. It's a long battle, but only if we show grace to each other can we win this battle and hopefully win the larger war of freeing and liberating our people from the oppression that we face. So.
Yeah, I love that. I think there also can be grace and being like, I'm not down with that anymore, but like, I wish you well. Like, obviously the older we get and friendships phase, people you were in the street with 15 years ago, they might not recognize the work that you're, and vice versa. It's like any relationship, people change.
Mhm.
But I also like, and like all these relationships, especially for us who are a bit more public, don't have to end in a battle of like death and like, well, not death, but everything.
Well,
Like
we are. Yeah, I mean, we've
there's
come a great deal from the days of our elders. Let's say. I mean, I know we're older now, but our
yeah,
elders, they settled their splits, in a lot of different ways, in which we luckily don't do these days. And so there may be
well, I
strife
mean,
and discontent.
I know what you.
There may be anger at times when folks don't talk to each other, and even sadness. But at the
Yeah,
very least, I agree with you. There's a lot of ways in which, people we've been in community with a long time, um, time passed and some amends is made for those of us who don't talk as much as we used to. And I also think you're right that work continues in a lot of different ways. I personally think grassroots organizing is extremely important, which is why I keep trying to attempt to make models, but I know there's other ways in which movement work happens, and whether or not that's media work, whether or not that's because people are writing and publishing articles and books, which are important for folks to read and to grasp, to understand how the world works, whether or not that's even some electoral work, which I think, again, that challenges the dominant parties, but uses that as space to do organizing. And so I think there's a lot of ways for folks to, cultural work. There's a lot of ways for folks to contribute to movement, and it's not necessarily always doing the same things. I certainly don't do the same things that I did, I can't even say 15, 30 years ago now at my age. But I try to, relate the experiences and also try to build in a way that can leave something for other organizers the way, that we all wish somebody had given, like, provided for us. And so hopefully, at the very least, I can, my own personal journey, I can help support and build something that other folks can use and build on and expand. And that's what you can hope for these days, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe we do have a national movement. That's why groups like this are critically important in local organizing. Like just the last 4 to 5 years, right? Like post Ferguson, post the euphoria of Black Lives Matter and all the young people, BYP, Dream Defenders, and all of them exist. I'm not saying they exist. I'm just saying we don't have a national movement. And part of it is the over reliance on elections. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm really glad when we were like, at least when I came into organizing, like for real, all those years in Brooklyn, MXGM, I'm like, did I vote? Like, did I even, did I?
No,
Maybe
we
I.
didn't bring that up at all, did we? We didn't talk
Right.
about,
It
yeah.
was not even a thing, like, yeah, whatever kind
We
of
would
thing.
work with some elected officials like Charles Barron,
Yeah.
but we
Which
were
is funny.
not,
He just
yeah.
called me on the phone because tomorrow I'm trying to have Charles and Inez, who were both city council and assembly members in the legislature in New York State, to talk about what the hell's going on in New York City with Adams.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
no, it's funny. Like, so last night I called a mutual friend. Her name is Dana. And I was like, yo, who's running the city? She's like, yeah, I don't know. Like, she's like, people working there don't know who's running the city. And I'm like, we got to talk about this. But so when I say national movement, I think what happened very quickly is when you rise that fast and you don't have a base space that's outside of visibility or tweets or whatever, when it comes down, is done in a way. And then there's a lack of trust right now with maybe generation younger than me who are like, it was here, it went here, and now what? There's a lot of critiques, which I think are important, but that over reliance, that idea that how do you have a national movement like that again? I don't think you do, especially with the continuing levels of surveillance and all those things that are happening. But I think when we were doing the work, thank God there wasn't social media. And I also, you know, when you're doing work, it doesn't mean like you got to be friends with everybody. I mean, like we were comrades. We're
Yeah,
one
yeah.
was most of us, but in terms of a leadership role, you don't have to like everybody, but
Mhm,
also you could trust that there's certain people that are like, oh, they are doing good work. Like,
mhm,
because then one of the things too is you can't do everything.
mhm,
You
mhm.
will at the beginning because you're excited, you have the energy in that, and then you start to grow and you develop yourself, and then you pick things that you like or don't like. But overall, there's one thing that I think we all should be doing is operational unity. Like, I don't know this, but I know I could talk to Kamau about Cop City because that's not in Albany, and I know he's going to tell me, and it's not just what's on the media or that. Lastly, wins take a minute, you
Mhm,
know, and I think we've seen this the best with the freedom of many of our political prisoners, right? Starting
mhm,
probably with the first wave, the Puerto Rican ones, when Hillary Clinton was running, they were 10 of them were let go. Oscar Lopez Rivera actually stayed because one other brothers, they wouldn't release him, and then they released Luis Rosa, and it just kept Oscar there for another 8 some years. And then Obama, when he was leaving,
mhm,
he gave him the pardon. But
mhm.
when I started doing interviews about that, people were like, oh, Barack Obama freed Oscar Lopez Rivera. And I'm like, no, he didn't. 25 years of political prisoner work freed Oscar, but now we've seen, and too many that are being released because they're dying.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
see if Lil Moonsey can't come out strong, right back doing the work, and then we'll see. When we saw Matulu Shakur come out, and it was like, man, they only let him out because he's about to die. But why I bring that up is because when you're doing this movement work, you don't win all the time. It becomes cumulative. So we're
Mhm.
talking about not just us, hundreds and thousands of people, including the world, that recognizes that someone like Mumia Abu Jamal or Mutulu Shakur or Move 9, the Puerto Rican 11, are freedom fighters.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important lesson. But around operational unity, I think I hope that's what some of us are still doing as we
No,
mentor
I
young.
believe, yeah, and I think you're right. I think it's extremely important. I think the only thing I would add to what you were saying around what happened to some of those movements. Again, I wasn't personally involved in obviously that portion of the work that was sort of really big at a time, like now 7, 10 years ago. Is that I do think what the system has devised for us is, we come out of the 60s and 70s. We basically had the destruction of militant movements, of militant Black movements. We had COINTELPRO, that tore apart organizations. We had prosecutions. We had people talk about drugs rushed into the community, but basically we had the Black radical movement was destroyed, and what was left in its place was a voting rights movement. Right, if you want to express your political opinions, you could only do that through voting, in
Yeah,
terms of a legal mechanism where you wouldn't get jailed or banged over the head. And I think the uptick in the resources that were given to movements, in terms of the nonprofit industrial complex. I think there was a time period where it's far more crude as an apparatus than what it is now, in terms of, foundations would tell you, we're not giving you money if you do the A, B, C, D. These
mhm,
days, it's a little bit more insidious, right? You can use radical language and still get resources. And so they don't necessarily tell you not to do A, B, C, but a lot of times it's the pressure of having resources, not having, like you said, sort of the experience of how to use those resources, not understanding the role of mainstream or corporate media on our movements, which is not to help support our movements, but which is to cause infighting by lifting certain people up, by tearing certain people down, and all the sort of, particularly within the American complex or context, the
Mm,
jealousies, the envy, the fighting that is so easily manifested, the idea around who has resources, who don't, who deserves, who doesn't. And so groups are literally fighting to get resources, and other groups are literally fighting the groups who are fighting to get resources, right? So we ourselves are all caught in this sort of dilemma of how do we create movement, how do we create organizing that is radical, while at the same time a lot of our organizations, 501c3s, including CMB, get resources. And now the question becomes, do we use these resources to continue radical struggle, or has these somehow the gathering of these resources and the fact that now people are staffed or have salaried or have stipends, or you have bills to pay, does that by its very nature make you more conservative and dependent on state, or apparatuses that give you money, which by its very nature makes you slightly more conservative because now you have something to lose. So I
mm.
think our movements have to think about all of that kind of stuff, in order for us if our goal is still, self-determination, if our goal is still the idea that we as Black people in particular, talking about the Black movement, need to separate ourselves from America and to organize and have self-determination and control, and to fight for alternative economic, ideas, i.e., socialism as opposed to capitalism. If those are all still the things that we believe, then we must seriously continue to evaluate how our movements have been pushed into certain spaces and places, and whether or not all those, if we don't handle it correctly, what happens to us, and again, whether or not, how purposeful some of that is in terms of what's given and what can be taken away.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, that analysis is on point. And also obviously the assassinations and incarcerations from the 69 to probably about 77, and then we get to the Reagan era and the militarized police era. And I think what you just said was so necessary, because the older you get, you have to reflect, and this somebody here said a lot of these movements get stuck in their own loops, living on the problem instead of trying to solve it. And that goes to what Kamau was saying about the nonprofits, right? Like, if nonprofits solved all the problems, there wouldn't be a need for a nonprofit, you
Mhm.
know. And they essentially, including the big ones from the ACLU and all of them, they're always in some sort of compromise, or you know make it easier. And it's like, well, it's fascism. Like, I think we need to fight a lot more than just be at the table with any of our enemies, and that, let me see, that the youth think they have no investment. I've been thinking about that a lot, probably because, my daughter is almost 20. And she told me when things started to kind of fall apart on the movement, so she's like, Mom, we don't trust y'all. She was just like, I don't trust it. I don't
Mm.
trust you. And I said, who? And she goes, the adults. And she's like, the movement was supposed to make things better. Nothing is better, So I could tell when she was telling me that it was hurtful. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, no, no, no. I heard you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, okay. And essentially in this country at this moment, I don't think young people trust anything.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, I think we're like in, a different stage of movement where different politics have also come to fore, right? The ideas of abolition, even, queer radical feminist politics, are
Right.
things which, for old folks like us, are relatively speaking new, right? And people are pushing boundaries as they should.
Yes.
But I think all that, I think those type of, the I want to call them the newer ideologies, because some of these ideologies have been around for a while, but ideologies that have taken hold are not, or they do come into conflict with old school organizers at times. And I think there's good things to pull out of new new or burgeoning or your youthful or ideological mixes, as well as there's things to pull out from our past history around what struggle has been and should continue along the line of. I mean, I think there's obviously contributions, but I do think, as you say, sometimes the clashes that take place, I feel my individual opinion of them a lot of times are unnecessary. Again, we're not in a phase where people are potentially being killed because of ideological differences, but we are at a stage where people are practicing a sense of purity around their ideological positions.
Mm,
And if you don't match up to what their sense of what's purity, because I'm not even necessarily agreeing with some ways in which people like to phrase things around politics, but when people have their individual sense of they're always right and they're never wrong, and when they say criticism, self-criticism, but what they really mean is criticism and criticism, because they hardly ever self-criticize, then you do enter these phases where it's hard to build national organizations, international organizations that actually have a chance to battle and defeat capital or capitalism. Remember, our enemy's capital is not a local phenomenon. Capital is not something that just arises in a neighborhood or a city. Capital is both local, national, and international. It fights, a lot of different ways in a lot of different places, all at the same time. If our movements are not sophisticated enough to understand the enemy that we claim that we're fighting against, and then we
mm,
continually will fall into the hole again when it's easier to fight each other, and feel like you're getting some recognition or you're putting somebody in their place or you're um, um, showing in some way that you can win something, but you're winning it against a fellow organizer as opposed to the state itself.
yeah.
When we get caught in that trap,
Mhm,
I think that's where, yeah, again, my challenge to young organizers is when I talk to folks, I always say just have grace for yourself and others, right? Because again, one of those sayings of what you didn't always know, right? And others are trying to also learn. Or if you're really organizing people, people are not going to be as political or politicized or believe the same things that you do. And if you're really organizing the people, the quote unquote masses, then you're going to have to encounter people who don't hold or share the same ideological practices. And your job as an organizer is to win those people over. It's not to insult them. It's not to embarrass them. It's not to call them nothing. It's not to hold tribunals against them. It is to literally win them over to a position where they now can fight for power. And if organizers don't understand that, then organizers are not organizing at all. People are just caught up in their feelings around how they want to be treated, spaces they want to create. And so I think it's a challenge to all of us that for those of us who still hold sort of a radical imagination of what we think the future can be, to really study what the enemy does and what is, excuse me, what is our role in countering that enemy through organizing work.
yeah. So look, you're in Georgia, right? And so much of the electoral political process, and a lot of the analysis, it's centered there. What does that what so around electoral politics? What don't we know about Georgia? Meaning when Stacey Abrams was running, and with Black voters organizations, and that people may think like, yo, mad people might vote, like they're not going to sit this one out, which I don't. I think what is going to happen is people are going to sit it out. But what does that look like in Georgia with these kind of organizations and that type of money flooding movements and organizers and organizations? Like, who can say no to that?
Well,
That
yeah, I
I'm
think
asking
that's the,
you, like
Mhm.
rhetorically, like who
Yeah,
says
yeah, yeah. No, I think you described the very nature of the trap, which is even if you are a group that believes that we have to get by voting for, the lesser of two evils, so much resources is poured in to having a lot of groups who do, again, the groups that do electoral work really stay within a camp of believing that they can influence the Democrats, right? And the only way to influence them is to turn out voters and say, look what we did for you. But what's also happening is that these organizations are being captured in a sense of your demands are being denied and not listened to. And if you want those resources, you still have to go out there and get people to vote or get people to register to vote, even if your demands are not being met, right? And so the very same people who have, some people I know who have radical analysis in politics, they themselves talk privately about, particularly now, with this genocide taking place, which is being done by Democrats, right? This is a genocide of the state. It's a genocide that shows no difference, no matter what party's in power. But what's important for us to recognize is that it is the Democrats in power. And so as they're now pushing Kamala Harris on us as some sort of new Barack Obama, when Barack Obama wasn't even Barack Obama in terms of what was being pushed on us, we are like as opposed to breaking away and saying, I'd rather break away and have the ship go down. Particularly if you do this electoral work, let the Democrats fail and then make them come back to you. Because at least now you've shown them that one, you have the ability to walk away, two, that they need you. And so if you do this kind of electoral work, then you can then try to press for real demands. But at this stage, no demand is met, right? Because the Democrats are always tilting to the right. And so when you're saying defund the police, your Democratic savior is saying, no, refund or more funds for the police, to a standing ovation to both in Congress by both Democrats and Republicans. When we're saying, or people are calling for at the very least a ceasefire, the Democrats are telling you, oh, we're trying to get that, but continue to give billions and billions of dollars for military and economic aid to Israel, while at the same time never threatening to cut it off, which of course means that they don't want a ceasefire. Because if you're the one supplying the weapons and the guns and you're saying you want a ceasefire,
Yeah,
you
it's
would
a
stop
money
supplying the
maker.
weapons and the guns, wouldn't you? And
Yeah,
then
it's a money
there would be a
maker
ceasefire.
for the gun owners and all. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like why Harris, like, yeah, we know you have a gun. Why do you have to say it in every interview? And part of that may be too, as a woman, the patriarchy could be like, oh, women don't own guns, and like
No,
when
it's the way,
she,
it's the tilt right. It's the tilt rightward. It's again, it's always tilting rightward. It's always trying to show these white folks, these white middle class folks, or these white folks who vote Trump. They're always attempting to win those folks over. They're
right,
never attempting to win the left over. They're busy cascading the left, showing the left that you have no other options. And as long as what supposedly again is the left in terms of the electoral function of some of these
yes,
groups, as long as they refuse to break away from the Democratic Party and sit out an election and vote green or vote some other candidacy, if they refuse to do that, then they're really not doing anything but playing footsie with the Democrats, right? No matter how many times people want to suggest that they're doing more, in the end of the day, they're trying to get people like Stacey Abrams elected or Kamala Harris elected or some other Democrat elected, where at the same time, what happened to your most progressive Democrats in New York? Jamal Bowman, in St. Louis,
Corey Bush.
Corey Bush. They were challenged in the primary by Democrats and by the Israeli lobbies, right? And what did the leadership of the Democratic Party do? Nothing. Did they tell them not to challenge them? Did they come out and support their incumbents in seats they already held? No. Not only did they look the other way, but a lot of them went out and supported the other candidates who were not as progressive. And so the old party is eating away at its progressive base and saying that they don't want it and they don't need it. And so when we look at it, these Democrats have a hold on even the most left parts of the voting rights groups. And until they break away again, until they say, we don't need to participate in this election and let you fall down, they can never show the democratic institutions that they are willing to exercise power and then to make demands off of the power that they've exercised. Again, I'm not somebody who does a lot of electoral work, but if I was doing a lot of electoral work, my strategy, and if I was serious about being a radical person who did that work, at some point you would have to break away and let that party fall down. And at the very least, then you can make demands. At the very most, you can build third-party options and apparatus to challenge, because the Democratic Party is nothing but part of U.S. hegemony and Western hegemony. So at the very least, if you want to deal with it, you deal with it from a position of power. But fighting for alternatives and third parties is something that also should be on the table for these groups in terms of getting folks elected.
Well, look, what you said is exactly what Trump has done with his base. You know, then to hear, as you said, Vice President Harris be like, no, actually not to hear, but to see her being endorsed by Liz Cheney, whose father is a freaking war criminal, created the whole, ongoing wars in this country. And I looked and I said, so Liz Cheney is more important to you, like, but you still haven't gone to talk to Puerto Ricans in Orlando. Like, you go to Puerto Rico, which was hilarious because this is what was funny about. So she goes to Puerto Rico about a year ago, right? And she's making, like, they definitely were in a more working class community. Usually they were like up in a mountain and all the condominiums with all the white elite Puerto Ricans. And she starts dancing, but the song was about America, like, get the F out of here.
I remember that.
Right? But she's like, I'm hearing a drum. And I'm like, right, because you don't know the words. And then people are posting it. But to see her do this, I'm not saying it's surprising. It's almost like, why aren't you going out to the people who are telling you that all you have to do is ceasefire? They're just saying, say the word, and you're like, nah, I'm good. Because what? You're going to change 70-year-old minds of white men in Wyoming, or you're going to go to Florida and try to, like, still be about the Cuban vote when actually that's not even a big vote, or it doesn't really change that like it did in the past. It doesn't mean that much. And so Trump has done exactly what your analysis says, but also on the third party. Look, having run as a third party in 2008, 16 years later, I'm like very hyped about this election in this way. I have never heard or seen young people being like, we are done with both the parties. And to see what the uncommitted movement did, I think that's when you go, we will embrace the electoral political strategy because that's a good strategy. So the uncommitted movement itself, right, they didn't even let one of them speak at the DNC, even though they were like pre-negotiating it with her team. But then they came out and said, no Trump, no Harris, and no third parties, right? And people are like, oh, that's messed up. I'm like, no, that's called a tactic, dude. Right? Then we also see how major unions are not endorsing either candidate, which means the union members are like, oh, hell no. This can't be it anymore. It can't be this duopoly. It cannot be this constant saying you can't pay workers or safety or, just forgive all student loan debt. You want people to buy houses who are still in debt 30 years ago. It just, to me, it just seems so easy to just be like, say something like, it's not like we're going to believe you're actually doing it, but you're not even trying to do that. And then now, at least for the Green Party, 85% of the lawsuits to not have us on certain ballots come from the Democratic Party.
Exactly.
And then lastly, the Green Party is on 40 states for sure. Okay, no third party, including the Working Families Party, which is not a third party. It's a line, and all they ever do is endorse Democrats. And they're like, you can go here too. Because I saw an interview, I'm like, you're not a party. You're like on 2 ballots. The Green Party's like on 40 with $3 million, and Jill, like, come on. But all of that being said, I think there's now the cracks are in there. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think is that close that you don't know, or do you think like Trump or Harris is going to pull it off?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be either Trump. I don't think the Green Party has a
No,
chance
no, not
at.
the Green Party. I mean,
Oh,
Trump. Well, of course, we don't have the chance.
oh, I thought that's what you
No,
said.
no. What I was saying, knowing that it's been the best, but now I'm saying, well, I should have done
Mhm.
a little bit better. I know that. Yes, people, we're not 40 being the most ever, but
Yeah,
when it comes down to it in 28 days,
yeah.
who do you think pulls this?
I mean, if I'm horse betting, I'm still thinking that Trump, but I think it's close, and I think he can go. I actually do think, at least from the polls that I've seen, it can go either way. I just don't think you can discount. White folks still make up the majority or close to majority. You cannot discount how overwhelmingly whites vote Republican. Folks always talk about how black folks are solid Democrats. Well, white folks are solid Republicans. White
Right.
women, white
Yeah.
men,
That's a
all age ranges, all income levels for the most part. So you can't throw that out because there's still so many of them here. And I just wanted to quickly back up a couple of points that you made because, again, another indication of how our party just doesn't care about you whatsoever is that at the convention, as you said, they asked for a Palestinian speaker, a Democrat Palestinian speaker. At the same time, they're putting Republicans on the platform. They're putting Israeli hostage families on the platform. Again, a low count is that well over 40,000 Palestinians have been assassinated, murdered over the last year. And that's a low count,
yeah.
right? But yet the Democrats could not put one Palestinian, and that's in spite of polls, right? And so this is not about polls. This is not about public opinion. This is about what the empire wants and desires, which is to have an outpost in Israel. And that empire consists of both Democrats and Republicans. And so even though I think it's close, I think the distinction that we make between them is probably not as much as we would like to believe. And so therefore, either one winning is a defeat for the masses of people. It particularly is a defeat for Black people. And I agree. And one thing though that I definitely too want to highlight is not just Trump, but the Tea Party, the whole part, the Republican Party, has had its own internal sort of revolutionary force that's take place, where within since Obama was elected, you've had the Tea Party, and from the Tea Party now you have the Make America Great Again in Trump. You've had this whole makeover of the Republican Party that is not as much of a business party anymore as it used to be. Of course, it still has that in it, but now there's this competing force within the Republican Party, and again, the left on the Democratic side has never been able to maintain that, or never been able to create that within the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party, as much as we don't like to think about it, is as ruthless as you get. It is ruthless at weeding out and siding against its left and or progressive forces. And so it makes sure it holds those folks at bay. And it's an extremism of moderates that dominate the Democratic Party. And by moderates, I mean moderate to right wing. And so in a lot of ways, of course, there are some domestic policy differences between the parties, but not as much as we may think, and not definitely enough for all the investment that we've given to the Democratic Party without seeking alternatives and or new strategies, again, in terms of the electoral work that people do.
Yeah, I mean, I think Trump wins because there's a significant number of young Latino men who are part of the Proud Boys and a lot of these right-wing paramilitary groups, and you see it in their leadership all down, being based in Albany, New York. For folks that don't know, I'm 3 hours outside of New York City, but I always have to tell people, like, it's a state. New York City is not the state of New York. So the further I would go up, closer to the Canadian border, it's all Trump signs. I mean, there's Trump signs on the block I live, and as always, people are like, well, we know how New York is going to go. I'm like, but it's bigger than that for them. They're in New York organizing, where most people are like, oh, they're going to be down south, or, that's some like Pacific Northwest. I'm like, no, that's right here, the capital of New York, which means they're all over. They're all over. But I think he wins because of that. But even with that, he loses. Who knows what the hell they're going to do? He wins. That we already know what he's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, we're just gonna go everywhere and we're gonna give every undocumented person, we're gonna drop them off at the border. All my enemies, I'm gonna, commute all the sentences of the patriots kind of thing. And I think Donald Trump is kind of that person that some of the things he says is true in this way. Is DC a swamp? Absolutely. Does Kamala Harris not really care about poor people? Absolutely not. So it's like that kind of thing, like, oh shit, is he right?
Yeah.
We already
Yeah.
know he's right. So the fear, and that's what I don't like. I don't like how the Democratic Party, particularly, and all its activists and people are like, if you don't vote in the most important election of the year, or you vote third
Of your
party
lifetime. No.
of
Of
your
your
lifetime, right?
lifetime.
Oh, it's a
Oh,
lifetime.
yeah. Which
Or
was
if you
4 years ago, which was 4 years before that, which was 4 years before.
yeah, before that. Or you vote third party, that's why we're
You're
gonna
throwing your
lose.
vote away. That's why.
I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
or always your ancestors died for this. I said,
Yeah.
our ancestors died for freedom. Let's
Mhm.
just like for freedom. None of them were running. Like Fannie Lou wasn't like, hey, I
She
want to
didn't
run.
die for the Democratic Party. I
But
don't
that
think she
whole guilty thing, and it's like, no, our people were fighting for freedom and got a win under what you called earlier in a judicial part. It was like part of the voting rights, civil rights to voting rights, And then lastly, like this issue with Roe versus Wade, I think the Democrats have completely dropped the ball on that. I think that they overemphasize on abortion as opposed to saying this is not just about abortion. It's about a population of people that are going to be denied their reproductive rights. And if we look at things in the past, like if you ever read the work of Margaret Stanger, who helped create Planned Parenthood, so that like no black babies would be born, there's a lot y'all need to read about that. This doesn't mean that one day it won't impact men as well. Like I have this scenario in my head, like, okay, so what would it look like if then all of a sudden, let's say men who are incarcerated come out and are like, oh, we got to sterilize you because, you don't have a right to have a child because you were in jail. Those things are not far flung.
No.
So this idea of them just honing on abortion is like, no, because also within our communities to this day, there are going to be people in our families and they're not understanding really cultures like particularly Latino culture that see that as the most pressing issue, which is understandable. That's the Catholicism, but then they're also worried about jobs and safety and their children, and to boil it down to that thing, that's why I think the Republican is even doing better around this issue, because that's all you keep talking about, as opposed to our body, my choice. And when we mean that, like if I want to get 27 tattoos, that's my choice. And I'm wondering how you've seen that, but the subsequent other two decisions, right? Well, first the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, and then overturning of Roe versus Wade, and now banning affirmative action. All I can say is all these things that were won in the 60s are no longer the laws and have reverted back to like late 1800s. Like,
yeah. I mean, in addition to like, notice what the Democrats are putting up sort of a false fight on abortion rights, supposedly, where again, when they had opportunities to protect abortion rights,
they didn't see.
they never did, right? But that's been their battle cry. And that's very similar to what Democrats do. They'll make something a battle cry, but when they have the opportunity to put it into play, they back off and do the thing that's less challenging, or do the thing that's easy, or do the thing that takes less political will to do. That's why we have Obamacare as opposed to national health care, even though at the time you had a 2/3 majority in Congress, and you should have been able to push something like that through. And then the other thing about what you said, which is very striking, notice the Democrats don't say a word about losing affirmative action. They don't speak about affirmative action. They don't speak about trying to bring affirmative action back. They don't speak about the judges who threw out affirmative action and how that needs to be a platform. So nothing again about the one area. And again, we know affirmative action was uneven. We know it didn't help the masses of Black people. But of course, it did provide some support for some people in terms of college, in terms of loans, in terms of jobs. But all of the conversation of race is being pushed and swept under the rug. Only the Republicans get to talk directly about race, and the Democrats keep their mouth closed because,
Mhm.
again, they are far more interested in winning over the white Republicans or the white folks who are positioning themselves to be Trump supporters than they are about winning over a progressive constituency, holding on to principle. Because again, they feel like the Black folks have no place else to go, right? And
Yeah.
that's their mantra. You don't have any place to go. We need to go get these white folks and get them back into our camp, even though they continually being Republican light. And so, why would these white folks who want to write right wing, who have this history of white supremacy, why would they vote Republican right or white Republican light when they have real Republicans right there to vote for? So your softened Republican stances are not going to be enough to win over the people who want hardcore Republican stances because they have Donald Trump for that, right? So the whole idea of it, again, for our people, for our positions, is a constant losing battle because we refuse to break away from the two-party system ourselves because it may be a lack of resources, or we don't want to be out in the wilderness, or we don't feel like we can build alternative structures in terms of third parties to build new systems of, again, for those who do that kind of work. And we don't also want to engage in the level of grassroots organizing that it would be needed in order to make real radical change. Because that's really, really hard work. That's not easy work at all. That is a trade that people don't want to do as much as we talk about it these days. Again, one of the reasons it's so much easier for folks to have meetings with politicians or elected officials or business people is because it's a softer life. It's not a life that's going to be imposing. But when you're talking about going on the block, chatting it up with people, trying to get them to come to meetings, trying to organize rallies and demonstrations, that's so hard work. And sometimes there's little sort of gratitude and even immediate wins out of it. That what else would people prefer to do, right? Prefer to spend their time talking to middle class folks and going to cocktail parties and having discussions at Martha's Vineyard and all the rest of it, because
Mhm.
it's such an easier thing to do than it is to say you're going to go up into the hood and organize the hood.
Yeah, and I've been surprised that neither one has gone to any college or university. Well, Trump would have never, but like even Harris, like, you know, and I think part of that too is that especially for the Democratic Party, they probably wouldn't be welcomed at any university because of what they have done to students and the brutality and calling police on students on campuses where students legit are going into debt. Okay, like and you kind of see now how academia is really beginning to crumble. And part of what they're saying now is that their population of African American, Latino, even Asian, but African American, Latino population has dropped because they don't have affirmative action. I'm like, that's not the. So what if you don't have it? Why aren't you recruiting the best of the best in this sense? Why aren't you going to the hood and seeing who might want to go to college? And it's trending now with a younger generation that are rethinking everything that they've learned about how you succeed in this country. The only way is going to a college and a university. But look, you're going to make a lot more money like being a plumber or
Mm-hmm.
HVAC or like legit skills, especially now with a lot of the automation happening. I
Mm-hmm.
think people in general are just like, what's the point of going to a space where it's supposed to be the bastion of freedom and it's something that you want to do, whether it's liberal arts or business school or things like that. So I think it just goes again to what we're seeing, which I think is
Yeah,
fantastic, that young people in general are questioning everything. They're
exactly.
like more clear on systemic things. But before I let you go, I wanted to know if you could tell folks a little bit about Cop City, because there we also see the intersection of militarized policing and new tactics being taught, but also the destruction of green space in Atlanta to build this monstrosity.
Yeah, so we're at the stage where Cop City, we're in October. The schedule for the city is to complete most of Cop City by December and actually open up a portion of it. And so
Okay, can
although out,
I'll just go a little bit back, just like what
Mhm.
is Cop City?
Oh, so Cop City is a militarized police training center that was proposed in 2021 after the rebellions, when George Floyd was killed, Breonna Taylor was killed, here in Atlanta, Rayshard Brooks was killed. It was after those rebellions that the city of Atlanta became sort of a ground zero for new experimentation tactics. And one of the things that I think the police all across the country, and politicians and elected officials, what they wanted to do was to do a better job, in their estimation, of controlling movements and getting movements off the streets faster so that commerce could keep going. And so their lessons coming out of the movements of 2020, which talked about defunding the police, abolishing the police, finding alternatives to the police. But the lesson that they wanted to learn was how to have better tactics at controlling mass movements, as well as to continue the over policing of Black and brown communities, right? So Cop City was something that came out of that as a place for them to do trainings on urban warfare, have militarized equipment, as they say themselves, military grade equipment. It was about training officers from all across the country. So almost a national strategy and international, because the city of Atlanta, as well as other police forces, the police departments here in Georgia, were already doing training with the Israeli Defense Forces and with the Israeli police. And so this is basically the fulfillment for them of a strategy and a plan to better train. And when we say train, we don't mean training in terms of stopping crime. We don't mean training in terms of their interaction with the community. We
Mhm.
mean training in terms of suppressing movements. That
Right.
is the training that is the priority for them. And on top of that, they decided to do it in a forest area that was adjacent to a working class Black community. And that forest was a promise to be preserved for the usage of that community. And as opposed to preserving it, when they decided to act on their idea of building out this militarized police training center, they decided to do it there in the forest and basically to tear down upwards of over 300 acres of that forest in
Yeah.
order to bring Cop City to be. And so this has been a 3-year battle, in which organizers, activists, environmentalists, anarchists, nationalists, everyday people have been battling and fighting to stop Cop City from happening. But whereas the police and the politicians, and the Atlanta Police Foundation have continued to act to make sure that they build Cop City. And so the Black Democratic so-called liberal mayor has been walking lockstep with the Republican right-wing white governor of Georgia to get Cop City built.
That's Kent,
And so
right?
we have done everything. Yeah, that's Kemp. So we've done, everything within our power to slow it down, to stop it in various means and mechanisms. But because the city, it has the capital, obviously it has the violence of the state as a tool. Always remember that they killed, murdered Tortuguita in the forest where this is being built. We still
Yeah,
have
and folks that don't know, you really need to like go to Cop City. You could see Kamau also on a couple times on Democracy Now. This young person was literally like sitting down, legs crossed, and
crisscross hands in the air, holding their
oh
hands
yeah,
like this.
like this,
Yeah.
and they shot him. But like Fort was it
There was
almost
over 50 bullet
50?
entry and exit wounds.
Oh my.
And so
Mm,
they don't know the exact amount of times that the young person was shot.
Tortuguita.
Um, yeah, we only know that they were shot multiple times while they were sitting crisscross with their hands guarding their face.
Mm.
We have over 60 people who have domestic terrorism charges, well over 30 or 40 people who are facing RICO conspiracy charges. And so the
Also,
state is,
Rico, like Adams and Diddy.
yes,
Right,
RICO.
right. These 60 people, I'm sure they're gonna put a lot of effort because they were trying to save land and people.
Yeah.
Like
And
humanity.
so they're the enemy of the state because they tried
Yeah,
to save land, they tried to protect lives, and the state was not concerned. And so heroic efforts people have made all across the city and in some ways across the country to
yeah,
talk
because
about
they
Cap
build it
City,
here, they're going to try to build them
which
in
is the next step. They've already started building. I think the last map I saw had over 50 to 60 similar build outs of cop cities in different parts
oh,
of the country.
hell
So
no.
this is something that may have started it. I don't even know if it started here in Atlanta directly, but Atlanta became a hotbed of resistance. But this is now something which they're trying to implement, these large scale police, so-called police training centers, which again are nothing but militarized police training centers to stop movements. They're implementing a
Right,
strategy to do this in different police forces all across the country. So when we look at what's happening with the Palestinian movement, the college students, Cop Cities is a reaction to that. When we look at the movements to stop police violence in our communities, Cop Cities is a reaction to that. And I'll wrap up on this.
mm,
In the very indictment in which they did the RICO indictment, when they started charging people as part of a conspiracy, the date they said the conspiracy started was not the date when we started organizing against Cop City, but it was the date that George Floyd was murdered by the police. That is the date that they themselves said was the date that the conspiracy started. So the day when there was a movement, when that movement was reborn to
right.
fight against police violence, for the police and the prosecutors is the day in which a conspiracy started, a day a criminal conspiracy started. So for us, the day of movement, for them, the day of a criminal conspiracy. People should keep
Mm.
that in mind when they think about the role of the police and the politicians in our lives in this country.
Oh man, thank you so much for breaking that down. So as we wrap up, what makes you a disruptor?
I think if anything makes me a disruptor is because I have an analysis of the role of the state. I'm not shy about expressing it, and I don't believe that the propaganda of the state or corporations will do anything to literally support our liberation. That we have to bring that about ourselves. And so I'm not easily tricked into being a tool of the state. And so I would say that makes me a disruptor.
Oh, thank you. I agree. I concur. Can you let folks know? So you are on in the morning, right, with Black Liberation Media? Do you,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
Black
folks,
Liberation Media, we have a channel on YouTube. We
yes,
can reach us at social media. It's a platform we started about 3.5 years ago. We have well over 40,000 subscribers. It's been an integral part of the ability to try to fight back with a narrative that
yes,
talks about what it is that we as Black people want to achieve in terms of liberation and to fight back against mainstream and corporate narratives that try to degrade, lie on, and show what they consider to be dysfunction in our community, but not talking about the causes, which is the systems that we live under, the lack of control and the lack of resources. We try to make sure that we point out what's really happening in the world. And for that, we've been demonetized. We've had our channel nearly suspended a few times. We've had the algorithms mess with our ability to get our message out, but we still keep fighting and we're still here.
yeah. And I hope everybody watches. I keep saying, like, listen, folks, watch the media. Hello, young people. TikTok is not media. But Black Liberation Media exists, and then spaces like this are critically important. Democracy Now is critically important, and yeah. So Kamau Franklin, my comrade, my homie, he would get me out of jail. He would start practicing law.
It
He,
definitely would.
he would look out for me. I really thank you for your time and just seeing community movement builders grow, seeing you on media, because I always used to tell you, I'm like, dude, you need to have your own show, like, and you're doing that with a group of people, YouTube channels, Black Liberation Media, and you can also go to Cop City, Stop Cop City, to find out more information and see if you're on that list. Who's ever watching, your city might be next. And if you want to talk about organizing, do it ahead before they get there too.
That's
So
right.
thank you so much. I
Thank
love
you.
you.
I
And
love you too.
we'll bring you back soon. Maybe do a roundtable the day after the election.
Let's do it. I'm down. I'm always down.
I'm down for that.
All
Yeah.
right. All right.
All
Thank
right.
you so
Love
much
you.
for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. You'll see me here tomorrow. Disrupt the Chaos. Tomorrow will be Charles Barron and Inez Barron, formerly both Assembly, New York State Assembly representatives, and as well as City Council, where we're going to talk about what the hell is going on in New York City and who's actually running the city. Because apparently everyone's been indicted in City Hall. So I don't know. So we're going to ask two incredible people. And Charles Barron is a former Black Panther Party. So love you, comrade. We'll talk soon. Peace, everybody.